Hello, and welcome to Just Say It, the podcast that turns beginners into confident English speakers. Each episode brings you real-life conversations, repeat after me practice, and fun cultural tips. Ready to speak up? Let's dive in.
Welcome, curious minds. Today we're exploring a really crucial communication skill. It often feels a bit like walking a tightrope, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How to express a different opinion without, causing offense. We've all been there.
Definitely.
Either you kind of shy away from speaking your mind completely just to avoid friction, or maybe the flip side happens, emotions get the better of you, and, well, things don't end well.
Yeah, unintended consequences are common.
Exactly. So this discussion is really all about finding that sweet spot. How do you get heard? How do you maintain respect? And how do you actually build stronger connections, even when you just don't see eye to eye?
That's absolutely right. And it's such an essential skill. It's not just about like winning an argument. That's too simplistic.
Right.
It's for much deeper things.
Right.
Fostering trust, encouraging critical thinking, and genuinely enriching any conversation, really, or any collaborative work.
So enriching it rather than derailing it.
Precisely. It's about navigating disagreements in a way that builds understanding, builds those bonds, rather than creating divides or, damaging relationships. Think of it as maybe an advanced form of conversational intelligence.
Okay, conversational intelligence. I like that. That sets the stage really well. So let's jump right in. We all know that feeling, don't we? When it just seems, easier to agree with someone.
Mm-hmm. The path of least resistance.
Yeah, even when you've got this completely different perspective bubbling up inside. Why is that the default for so many of us? And maybe more importantly, what are we missing? What insights, what opportunities, maybe even what innovations slip through our fingers when we constantly avoid, respectful disagreement?
That's a really powerful question. It gets right to the heart of how we interact, doesn't it? And our kind of social wiring. It's true. Agreement often feels easier.
It does.
It smooths things over, avoids that potential conflict, and it can even feel like you're being agreeable, part of the team. Our brains are sort of wired to seek harmony and avoid threats. And disagreement. That can definitely register as a threat to our social standing, our relationships. So that instinct to just nod along, it's strong.
So it's almost primal then?
In a way, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the critical point. If we only ever agree, or if we keep suppressing our different views, we miss out on a huge amount of learning, innovation, personal growth.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, let's call her Taylor. She's a new project manager. She's in a brainstorming session.
Okay.
Everyone seems really enthusiastic, agreeing on this one strategy for a product launch. But Taylor, she has this lingering doubt, a different idea about a potential market segment.
Right. She sees something others don't.
Potentially.
Yeah.
But she hesitates. She doesn't want to disrupt the positive vibe or seem, confrontational. So if she stays silent, the team might just go down a path that overlooks a big opportunity, or maybe even a potential pitfall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The truth is, we learn the most, we grow the most, and we definitely innovate the most from conversations where we don't necessarily see eye to eye.
So it's not just about proving you're right, but about expanding your own understanding, and maybe even, like you said, preventing mistakes down the line.
Precisely. Every single time you genuinely encounter and engage with a different viewpoint, it forces you, whether you like it or not, to reevaluate your own assumptions, to consider new information, maybe even challenge the very foundations of how you think about something. And this isn't just like an abstract intellectual thing.
Right, it's practical.
The fundamental skill. It applies whether you're talking to a close friend about a big life decision, or engaging with a colleague at work about how to approach a project, negotiating with a client, or even just communicating complex ideas in writing.
Like an email or a report.
Exactly, where clarity and nuance are absolutely critical. It takes confidence, definitely, to voice your thoughts, clarity in how you say them, and maybe above all, politeness and courtesy in your delivery.
Confidence, clarity, courtesy. Got it.
Yeah. And when you handle it well, disagreement isn't destructive. It's the opposite. It can actually spark completely new innovations, lead to more robust solutions, and significantly better communication outcomes.
So it actually builds trust. That seems counterintuitive.
It really does build trust by fostering honest dialogue. Because when you can share your viewpoint respectfully, even if it's different from what everyone else is saying, it shows a deep respect for other people's opinions and their intelligence. It shows you value their perspective enough to engage with it thoughtfully, even while you're sharing your own. And that encourages a deeper dive into topics, prevents misunderstandings from just sitting there and festering.
Right.
And ultimately, it just enriches the conversation for everyone involved. It creates this psychologically safe space where diverse thoughts aren't just tolerated, they're actually welcomed. It's basically the antidote to groupthink.
The antidote to groupthink. That's a powerful argument for leaning into disagreement, but like you said, in a very specific, constructive way. Okay, so let's talk about how. What are some of those foundational principles that let us disagree respectfully? Let's start with maybe the hardest one. How do we keep our emotions in check when we feel really strongly about something? It feels like the second things get personal, the actual disagreement just gets lost.
You've absolutely hit on the very first, and yeah, often the biggest hurdle. The key here, the mental shift you need to make, is to consciously remember you're disagreeing with the idea or the concept, whatever your parent, friend, coach, coworker is raising. You're not disagreeing with them as a person.
That's a crucial distinction.
It really is.
Yeah.
It helps depersonalize the whole issue. It's a shift from you are wrong to I disagree with that specific point.
Right.
Because when you attack the person, their intelligence, their character, their motives, what happens?
Defenses go straight up.
Immediately. The conversation becomes defensive, emotional, and completely unproductive. Their amygdala, that primitive part of the brain looking for threats, it goes into overdrive. Rational thought, pretty much out the window.
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
We all have. And it's also absolutely crucial to avoid putting down the other person's ideas or beliefs. Just think about how it feels when someone does that to you.
It feels awful. Instantly shuts you down.
Exactly. It's miserable, alienating. So instead of even thinking, wow, that's a stupid idea,
Yeah.
even if that thought pops into your head, you have to consciously choose to rephrase it.
Okay, like how?
Maybe something like, oh, I don't quite see it that way, and here's why. Or, I appreciate you sharing that, but I actually have a different perspective on this aspect. It's a simple rephrasing, but the impact, it's enormous.
Because it focuses on the content, not the person.
Exactly. Content, not character.
Yeah.
You need to resist that temptation to yell or use sarcasm or make those little derogatory comments.
Oh, sarcasm is a killer.
It really is. Those tactics might feel satisfying for a second, like releasing frustration, but they almost never lead to getting your point across constructively. They just shut down the dialogue, erode the relationship, and often you end up regretting it later.
I can certainly relate to that. That moment things get personal, yeah, the real point just vanishes in the emotional smoke.
Okay, building on that, the next principle sounds like basic common sense, but it's probably the first thing that goes out the window in a heated moment. Listening first, speaking second. How do we really practice active listening then? Especially when our brain is already firing off the perfect rebuttal.
You're so right. It sounds simple, basic even, but it's incredibly hard in practice, especially when that internal voice is just screaming to be heard, right?
Yeah, formulating the counterattack.
Exactly. But being a truly good listener, it's powerful. It's often undervalued, but it's a huge way to show respect and understanding for the other person's viewpoint. It creates the space where they feel genuinely heard.
Which makes them more likely to listen back, much more likely to reciprocate. Yeah. The conscious effort here is to literally stop yourself from thinking about why you disagree or what you'll say next while they are still talking. That impulse to build your counter-argument while they speak, it's a natural bias, but it actively stops true listening.
So you have to consciously switch it off.
You do. Force yourself to focus entirely on what's being said. Really try to absorb their words, their tone, their body language even. And critically, what's the underlying message? What might be driving their point?
Like maybe a fear or a value.
Could be. Maybe a fear, a deeply held value, maybe a past negative experience that's coloring their current opinion. Then when it's finally your turn to talk, a really powerful technique is to actually repeat or paraphrase their key points.
But not in a mocking way.
Oh, absolutely not. Genuinely. You might say something like, okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, your main concern is X, and you believe Y might happen because of that. This isn't just a trick. It genuinely shows you listened, you heard them, which, again, makes them more receptive. Only then, after you've shown you understand, can you calmly present your case.
Okay.
Explain why you see things differently. Maybe starting with, I hear what you're saying about X, and I understand that concern. My perspective is a little different because this disciplined approach, it's not just for personal chats. It prepares you for those more diplomatic disagreements in professional settings too. where clear, respectful, empathetic communication is just vital for collaboration, for problem solving. It lays the groundwork for real dialogue by building that foundation of understanding before you counter.
That leads us neatly to another big one, often the biggest hurdle, especially when we're feeling passionate or, let's be honest, just plain angry. Staying calm, we know it's important, but what's the internal battle we need to win there? And how does keeping our cool actually affect the other person?
Staying calm is arguably the single most important thing you can do, especially when disagreeing. It keeps the conversation on track. But it is a huge challenge, no question, particularly if the person you're talking to starts getting heated themselves.
Right, because anger can be contagious.
It really can. Our mirror neurons are basically wired to pick up and reflect the emotions around us. So in those situations, you might have to consciously decide, okay, I'm going to be the mature one here, manage the conversation's temperature, even if the other person is, a parent, or your boss, or someone you think should know better.
So your calmness becomes like an anchor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
An anchor. It stops the conversation just spiraling out of control into a shouting match or a defensive shutdown.
Okay.
When you stay calm, you signal a few things. First, you're in control of yourself. That makes you seem more credible, less threatening.
Okay.
Second, it lets your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex, stay engaged so you can actually articulate your points clearly, logically.
Instead of just reacting emotionally.
Precisely. And third, it can actually diffuse the other person's anger, like emotional contagion in reverse. If they see you staying calm, reasonable, it becomes harder for them to keep up their own intense emotional state.
That's interesting.
And interestingly, this calm approach, it also ties into cultural preferences, particularly in British English. There's often a preference for avoiding overt conflict.
Oh, right. You mentioned that before.
Yeah, British culture tends to be quite conflict averse, especially socially. They'd often rather avoid creating a negative vibe. So a calm, composed approach to disagreement isn't just a personal skill, it's also culturally smart.
Which might contrast with other cultures.
Definitely. Contrast that with, say, some American or German communication styles, which might seem more direct, maybe even confrontational to outsiders. In those contexts, expressing strong emotion might sometimes be seen as showing conviction or passion, not necessarily a communication breakdown. The goal might be the same, everywhere be understood, but the path to get there, especially when disagreeing, can really vary.
That's fascinating how personal skill links to cultural norms. It shows that whole spectrum of communication styles. Okay, moving on to another principle we hear a lot about, using I statements. Why are they so effective? What's the psychology behind why you statements backfire and I statements seem to work?
I statements are effective because they fundamentally shift the focus. They move it from an external accusation pointing the finger to an internal personal experience.
Okay.
When you use you statements like, you always do this, you never listen, how does that sound?
Accusatory. Instantly puts me on the defensive.
Exactly. It feels like an attack on your character, your intentions, maybe your competence. Psychologically, it triggers that fight or flight response. Makes the other person less likely to hear your actual message and much more likely to either shut down or hit back.
Yeah.
So think about the difference. Telling your mom or dad, you always remind me about chores on Wednesdays when you know I have loads of homework.
Okay, that sounds like teenage angst right there.
Right. Versus saying, I'm feeling really pressured and a bit overwhelmed because I have a lot of homework tonight. Would it be possible for me to maybe do those chores tomorrow instead?
Totally different feel.
Completely different. The first one is a direct criticism. It implies they are the reason you feel bad. The second one, using I, communicates how you feel, what you think, what you want or need. It keeps the focus squarely on your experience, your feelings, not blaming them.
And it's hard to argue with someone's feelings, right?
It's very hard. You can't really tell someone they don't feel overwhelmed or pressured. It disarms that potential conflict because it invites empathy, understanding, instead of triggering defensiveness. It shifts the dynamic from you versus me to something more like, okay, my experience is X, how can we figure this out together? It moves from judgment to problem solving.
That's really clear. Owning your feelings, not assigning fault.
Okay, let's move into the actual words we use, the verbal strategies. The art of softening disagreement.
A lot of advice seems to emphasize acknowledging someone's point before you disagree. What's the magic there? How does that actually help bridge the gap?
The magic behind that, acknowledging before disagreeing, it lies in a really basic psychological principle. Validation.
Validation. Yeah.
Signals to the other person, hey, I genuinely listened, I understood your perspective, and crucially, I respect your right to hold that view. This isn't just, being polite for the sake of it. It directly impacts how receptive they are to your own differing opinion.
How so?
Well, when people feel heard, feel validated, their defenses tend to lower. They become far more open to considering alternatives. You're not just immediately rejecting their whole opinion out of hand.
But you're not dismissing them.
Exactly. You're gently offering another view. Essentially saying, okay, I've heard you, I've absorbed your point. Now that you know that, maybe consider this other angle. It sets a cooperative tone before you even introduce the disagreement itself.
So it kind of primes them to listen. Are there specific phrases that work well for this kind of acknowledgement?
Definitely. There are some really useful, almost standard phrases you can lean on. Think about things like, I see what you're saying, but, or I understand where you're coming from, but.
Okay. Simple but effective.
Yeah. Or maybe, that's a valid point, but, or I hear what you're saying, however. You can even soften it more. I completely see what you're saying, however. That little word, but, or however, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
The conjunction is key.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
It subtly prepares the listener. It signals, okay, a different viewpoint is coming now. Without it, your disagreement might feel really abrupt, maybe confrontational. It's like a verbal cushion, signaling you're about to gently steer the conversation down a different path, which allows the listener to kind of mentally prepare and stay engaged.
That makes perfect sense. It's like a little warning sign. Okay, speaking of things that feel a bit counterintuitive, our next strategy, the strategic apology. Why on earth would you apologize if you're not actually sorry for your opinion? This feels like some kind of linguistic puzzle, almost verbal judo.
It does feel counterintuitive, you're right. And yeah, it is a linguistic puzzle, but with a very strategic purpose. Starting your disagreement with an apology is actually a really common and effective way to soften the blow, especially in cultures that put a high value on politeness and social harmony.
So it's not a real apology?
Often, no. It's not about expressing genuine regret for your opinion or for thinking differently. It's more like a polite formula. It's a way of saying, look, I don't mean to inconvenience you by disagreeing, or maybe I'm sorry if my different view causes any discomfort or challenges your idea.
Okay. It's a cultural code.
Exactly. It's a code that just eases the delivery of that opposing view, makes it less confrontational. Think of it as a social lubricant. It's designed to keep the rapport going even when you diverge on something.
So it's not apologizing for being wrong, but for the potential social friction, or even just the slight imposition of offering a different thought.
Precisely that.
Yeah.
You're acknowledging the potential awkwardness or disruption that disagreement can sometimes bring, and you're sort of preemptively smoothing it over.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. You might say, I'm sorry, but I disagree with you about this. Simple.
Yeah.
Or, I'm afraid I don't agree. Another common one, I'm sorry, but I just can't agree.
Okay.
And to make it even softer, especially again in British English, you might hear something like, I'm really sorry, I'm afraid I have to disagree with you on, one or two things.
Adding one or two things, even if you disagree with the whole premise.
Right. It subtly minimizes the perceived scope of your disagreement, makes it sound less like a total rejection. It's all about maintaining that respectful, open tone, showing a bit of deference maybe. It's not necessarily about being perfectly accurate about the extent of your disagreement. It's about being polite and managing the social interaction smoothly. It's a perfect example of what linguists call negative politeness, minimizing imposition on the other person.
That's fascinating, the subtle power of those little add-ons. Okay, let's talk about hedging next. This sounds like the ultimate verbal soft landing, a really clever linguistic cushion. What exactly is hedging, and how does it actively, prevent conflict when you're expressing doubt or uncertainty?
Hedging is precisely that, a linguistic cushion. It means using specific words or phrases deliberately to soften your statements, make them less direct, and therefore less confrontational. It actively prevents conflict by reducing the perceived threat of your statement.
How does it reduce the threat?
By framing your thoughts as suggestions, maybe possibilities, or tentative conclusions, rather than absolute truths or direct challenges. When you do that, you leave room for the other person to, save face. And it allows them to engage with your idea without feeling immediately attacked or put on the spot. It signals humility, maybe an openness to being wrong, which tends to invite dialogue rather than just a head-to-head debate.
So instead of saying, your plan is flawed.
Exactly. Instead of that, you might hedge and say, I think there might be some areas in your plan that could perhaps use some further thought. See the difference? The second one is much less likely to provoke an immediate defensive reaction.
Yeah, much gentler. So it creates room for dialogue, prevents that immediate defensiveness. Can you give us some examples of these hedging phrases, maybe showing different levels of doubt?
Absolutely. We can kind of categorize them based on how much doubt they express, which makes them really adaptable. So imagine you just want to gently float a different idea or express just a slight reservation. What might you say?
Maybe something like, I'm not sure that's quite right, or just, I don't think so.
Perfect. Those are great examples of what we could call casual doubt. They're gentle, polite, perfect for everyday chats, or when you want to express a mild reservation without being too challenging. Other phrases like that include, are you sure? I'm not convinced. I'm sort of on the fence about that. I'm not entirely certain, or I'm not 100% sure. They're designed to show uncertainty without confrontation.
Okay, casual doubt. What if you feel a bit stronger about it, more skeptical?
Right. If you want to express stronger doubt, indicating a higher level of skepticism, you'd be a bit more direct, but still polite. This is useful when you want to challenge an idea more firmly.
So like, I doubt that, or that seems unlikely.
Exactly. Those fit right in. You could also use, I find it hard to believe. I'm pretty skeptical about. Honestly, I'm not buying it. Or, that doesn't quite sound right to me. These let you voice a significant reservation, but still invite discussion.
Got it. And what about uncertainty that lingers?
Ah, yes. For ongoing uncertainty, when you have doubts about something that isn't immediately resolved, you might use phrases like, I still have my doubts about whether that will work. I'm still unsure about the best path forward. I'm not entirely clear on the implications yet. Or, I'm still kind of on the fence about this whole approach.
These phrases really do seem to open up discussion instead of just being a direct challenge. Gives you a way to voice concerns without shutting the other person down. And you also mentioned softening that doubt even more with politeness.
Yes, absolutely. You can layer politeness on top of the hedge. For example, combining doubt with a self-effacing phrase like, I could be wrong, but I thought the report was actually due next week.
Okay.
Or, perhaps I misunderstood, but didn't you say the event was canceled? Other good ones are, it might just be me. I'm not sure this solution will really work long term. Or, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the budget for that was already approved.
Right.
These phrases convey this sense of neutrality, or even, a bit of feigned uncertainty, rather than just a blunt, you're wrong. You're not saying their idea is totally incorrect, just presenting your slightly different viewpoint. It creates space for both perspectives to kind of coexist as valid possibilities.
That's incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Okay, so besides these full phrases, what about specific types of words that act as hedges? You mentioned modal verbs.
Great question. Hedging isn't just about those set phrases. It's baked into specific word choices, adding lots of nuance. So yes, modal verbs. Words like might, could, may, and would are hedging workhorses. They imply possibility, not certainty. She might join us later suggests uncertainty.
Okay.
Adverbs. Words like perhaps, possibly, apparently, and generally soften things. She's generally very polite. Implies exceptions exist.
Right.
Phrasal expressions. Phrases like, it seems that as far as I know, or if I'm not mistaken, preface statements with uncertainty, highlighting your subjective view. Question tags. Adding tags like, isn't it? Or don't you think? Makes statements less direct. It invites agreement or discussion, kind of sharing the responsibility for the statement.
Ah, interesting.
Passive voice. Less common in casual chat, but it can hedge too. It is believe that instead of I believe that. Sounds more impersonal, distancing you from the claim. Useful in formal writing.
Wow.
All these little tools add up to a more nuanced, less confrontational way to communicate. Very important for keeping interactions polite and effective. But a quick word of caution, over-hedging can make you sound wishy-washy or lacking confidence.
Right, finding the balance.
Exactly. It's about strategic use.
It's amazing how much subtlety these words carry. Okay, so circling back slightly, instead of a blunt, that's a bad idea, what's a more diplomatic way? Playing on this idea of avoiding direct negativity. Why is that direct negativity so damaging, and how does reframing specifically help?
Direct negativity is just so damaging because it feels like a judgment. It triggers defensiveness immediately and basically shuts down productive conversation. When you say, that's a bad idea, it can feel like a personal attack on the other person's intelligence or their judgment.
Creates that us versus them.
Instantly. Makes them way less likely to listen to any constructive feedback you might actually have. So the trick is to reframe it. Reframe your disagreement more positively, or at least indirectly. Avoid those harsh, direct negatives.
Okay, so give me an example, like our project manager, Taylor.
Right. So If a colleague suggests an idea that Taylor thinks is, frankly, really difficult to implement, instead of the blunt, "that's a bad idea," Taylor could say, I don't think that's such a good idea given our current resources. See how adding such a softens it.
Yeah, it does.
And giving a reason, given our resources, provides constructive angle. Or instead of the very direct, "I disagree with you," you could try, "I don't think I can quite agree with you on that point right now." It sounds more like a personal struggle with the idea, not a flat rejection. And if you're thinking, "Wow, that's the worst idea ever," you might politely rephrase it as, "I'm not sure it's the best idea for this particular situation." The focus shifts to what is good or what could be better, rather than just highlighting what's bad.
And maybe suggest an alternative.
Exactly. You can strategically add a reason why another idea might be better. That feels much more positive, more constructive than just saying someone's wrong. Like, while I see the appeal of that approach, I'm leaning towards Plan B because it seems to address the budget issue more directly. It gives them a path forward, a reason to consider something else, not just a dismissal.
That's a subtle but really powerful reframing technique. And speaking of powerful and diplomatic, there's a phrase that seems incredibly effective. My experience has been different. Can you unpack why that works so well? It feels like the ultimate agree to disagree, but on a tiny micro level.
You've absolutely nailed it. That phrase, and similar ones like, "I can understand why you'd say that. My experience has been a bit different." They're super diplomatic because they achieve several key things at once.
Okay, what are they?
First, they directly acknowledge the other person's point, validating their perspective. I can understand why you'd say that. That's crucial. But second, it does so without invalidating your point. You're not saying they're wrong. You're simply stating that your personal experience, or maybe your viewpoint based on that experience, diverges from theirs. This makes space for both perspectives to exist side by side as equally valid truths, or at least valid experiences.
So it avoids that conflict of who's right and who's wrong.
Exactly, which is often what triggers arguments. For instance, if a colleague says, "Oh, everyone finds that new software incredibly intuitive," you could respond, "I can see why you'd say that. It definitely has some great features."
My experience was a bit different, though. I found the initial setup quite challenging.
See, you're not calling them a liar. Not at all. You're just sharing your own unique reality. It's a very polite way to handle disagreement, emphasizing that your differing view comes from your own encounters, your own reality, not some universal judgment on their statement. It's about sharing your perspective without trying to dictate theirs. It allows multiple subjective realities to coexist peacefully.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. We've talked a lot about words, but it's not just about the words we choose, is it? How our body language reinforces or maybe even contradicts our message. What role do these nonverbal cues play when we're trying to express a different opinion politely? It's like a secret language running underneath the words, right? How does it interact with what we say?
It absolutely is a powerful, unspoken language. Nonverbal communication, sometimes called silent language, it covers everything we observe when we're with others. Facial expressions, gestures, posture, eye movements, the lot. It's absolutely critical because it doesn't just reinforce what we say. It can clarify meaning, it can subtly signal doubt, or can communicate openness. Being aware of these cues, both in yourself and in others, is vital for managing disagreements well.
Why vital?
Because people often pick up on your true feelings through your body language, even if your words are perfectly polite and diplomatic. The key here is congruency.
Congruency, meaning they have to match.
Exactly. If your words are saying, "That's an interesting point," but your body language is screaming, "That's ridiculous," maybe crossed arms, eye rolling, guess which message gets believed.
It's body language every time.
Almost always. The nonverbal often overrides the verbal.
That makes a lot of sense. So, are there specific nonverbal cues that tend to express doubt or uncertainty, things we should look out for or maybe manage in ourselves? And how do they combine with our words?
There definitely are. And they can be incredibly subtle, but still very powerful. Let's break some down. Starting with facial expressions. Raise eyebrows. That's a classic sign of skepticism or surprise, right?
Yeah.
If someone makes a bold claim, you might raise your eyebrows just slightly while saying, I'm not entirely convinced, just to visually underline your verbal hedge.
Okay.
A furrowed brow suggests confusion or deep thought. It signals you're pondering something you're not sure about, maybe while saying, let me think about that for a second. Pursed lips can subtly indicate hesitation or disagreement, often accompanies a quiet, I'm not so sure about that.
Right.
A quick sideways glance can signal doubt or suspicion, almost a nonverbal, really. Pairs well with phrases like, is that definitely the case? And a half smile or smirk. Can be a subtle way to show skepticism without being overtly confrontational. A visual, I kind of doubt that. Use with caution, though.
Okay, makes sense. What about head movements?
Good one. For head movements, tilting your head often suggests curiosity or uncertainty, like you're thinking, are you sure? Or tell me more. A slight shake of the head can be a very small, subtle indicator of disagreement or doubt, often unconscious, even as you're verbally acknowledging a point perhaps, nodding slowly, can show you're listening, but maybe not fully convinced yet. It allows you to process while reserving judgment.
Okay. And gestures. We use our hands a lot.
We do. So, gestures, crossed arms, can signal defensiveness or skepticism, suggest you're not fully buying into an idea. Using this while saying, I do have some reservations, makes your stance pretty clear.
Yeah, that's a classic closed-off pose.
It is. Hands on hips. Can suggest questioning or challenging, often seen when someone's about to present a strong counterargument. Touching your chin or face usually indicates deep thought or hesitation. Signals, I'm mulling this over, especially if you want to show careful consideration, not instant rejection. And shrugging your shoulders, that's pretty universal for uncertainty, isn't it? Quick visual, I don't know, or I'm not sure.
Right. What about eyes? The eyes are windows, they say.
They definitely are revealing. Eye movements. Avoiding eye contact can signal discomfort or doubt, especially if you feel awkward delivering bad news or a dissenting view. Narrowed eyes often suggests suspicion or disbelief. Silently saying, I'm not quite buying that, and rapid blinking can indicate surprise or uncertainty, especially if you're caught off guard by what someone said.
Okay. And finally, posture. How we hold ourselves.
Posture speaks volumes. Leaning back can suggest distancing yourself from an idea or statement, creating a bit of psychological space. Shifting weight from foot to foot often indicates discomfort or uncertainty, revealing unease with the topic or disagreement. And turning your body slightly away could suggest disengagement or disagreement, a subtle signal that you're maybe mentally checking out.
Wow, there's a lot going on there. So combining these cues consciously with our verbal strategies can make our communication even clearer, like a layered approach to polite disagreement. But what are the pitfalls? Can this backfire?
Exactly. The combination creates a much richer, more comprehensive message. But yes, there are pitfalls. It's absolutely vital to always be mindful of your overall tone and facial expressions. The goal is to avoid coming across as dismissive, rude, or insincere.
So congruency again.
Congruency, yes, and sincerity. A subtle smirk combined with a polite verbal challenge. That can still feel incredibly condescending or passive-aggressive. The goal is to convey doubt or a differing opinion respectfully, not contempt or arrogance.
Okay.
And it's also critical to remember those cultural considerations we touched on. They apply just as much to nonverbal cues, direct eye contact. Seen as confident and attentive in many Western cultures, but potentially confrontational in some East Asian cultures where avoiding direct eye contact might show respect. Gestures vary wildly too. Expansive gestures common in Mediterranean cultures might seem over the top elsewhere. When in doubt, the best approach is usually to observe the people around you. Listen carefully to their tone, watch their body language, and adapt yours to fit the specific cultural situation and context. Always try to err on the side of respect and openness.
That's incredibly insightful advice. Observe and adapt.
Okay, so let's think about different scenarios now. Does the way we approach polite disagreement change much, depending on whether we're, say, chatting with a friend over coffee versus being in a really formal professional meeting? Do the stakes of the conversation change the approach?
Oh, absolutely. It changes significantly, and yes, the stakes are a huge factor. While those core principles we talked about, staying calm, not making it personal, listening first, they remain constant, but specific phrases you choose, the level of formality, that will vary dramatically with the context.
Okay, so formal settings first, like work, clients, maybe your boss, right? In formal settings, workplace meetings, client negotiations, presentations to superiors, the goal is always professionalism, clarity, and maintaining utmost diplomacy. Here, you should always try to acknowledge the other person's position first, like we discussed. Use phrases that clearly show respect and a willingness to engage constructively, even as you introduce your different view. The consequences of misstepping here can be much higher, right?
Yeah, loss of trust, career setbacks.
Exactly. Damaged reputation. So the language needs to reflect that seriousness.
So what would those phrases sound like in a formal context? Say, a high-stakes negotiation or maybe a board meeting?
In those formal settings, you definitely opt for more structured phrases. Things like, I respectfully disagree because, or I see your point, but in my opinion, a different approach might perhaps yield better results in X area. You might also hear, or need to use, "I'm afraid I don't quite agree with you on that particular clause," or the classic, "I beg to differ on the interpretation of that data."
I beg to differ. Very formal.
It implies polite but firm opposition. And beyond just stating your disagreement, you should aim to confidently provide clear, often evidence-based reasons for your stance.
Back it up.
Absolutely. Bring in a relevant example from a past project, maybe. Quote, a statistic from a trusted source. Cite an authority in the field to support your point. And a strong way to conclude while still showing openness is to say something like, "That is my current perspective based on the information available, and I welcome further discussion on this." It asserts your view, but signals you're still open to alternatives or new data.
Okay, that makes sense for formal situations. What about informal disagreement with friends, family? Can we be a bit more, direct there?
Yes, generally, in informal settings, talking with friends, family expressions can be a bit more direct than the super formal ones. But, and this is important, politeness is still key if you want to avoid uncomfortable interactions or, lingering resentment.
The stakes might feel lower professionally, but maybe higher emotionally.
Often, yes. Damaging a friendship can feel worse than disagreeing with a colleague sometimes. So even informally, you still want to stress that your disagreement is based on your opinion or your experience, not presenting it as some absolute unshakable truth.
So how might that sound?
Well, instead of a really blunt, "No way, you're wrong," you might soften it slightly to "No, not really," or "I don't think so, actually." If someone said something you think is inaccurate, maybe, "Well, that's not entirely true from what I remember." And instead of a harsh, "That's a terrible idea," you could soften it with hedging. "Maybe, but I'm not sure it's the best idea for us right now, given X, Y, Z."
Still softening it.
Still softening. Now, phrases like, "Are you kidding me?" or "You're dead wrong," they exist. People use them informally. But you need to use them really sparingly and with extreme caution.
Well, caution.
Because they can still come across as highly impolite, even rude or dismissive, if the relationship isn't incredibly close, or if there's maybe some underlying tension already, or if the context just isn't quite right for that level of bluntness. The goal, even informally, should generally be to maintain politeness and respect. It's all about calibrating your approach to the specific relationship and the specific situation.
That's a great distinction. It's more like a politeness style than a switch. You mentioned earlier that British English has this certain dance or rhythm around disagreement. How does this compare to, say, more direct communication styles we might find elsewhere? And what does this mean for listeners interacting with different cultural backgrounds? It sounds crucial.
It is crucial, yeah, because these cultural nuances are profound. In British culture, as we touched on, there's often a strong preference for what linguists call negative politeness and saving face.
Negative politeness.
It means minimizing imposition, actively avoiding direct confrontation, or doing anything that could potentially embarrass someone by flat out stating they're wrong. British people tend to be quite conflict averse, especially in social settings, or often with colleagues too. They'd usually prefer to avoid creating that negative or awkward atmosphere.
So they use all those softening techniques we talk about.
Extensively. Hedging, strategic apologies, acknowledging before disagreeing. It's almost like this delicate dance to navigate the disagreement without causing offense. It's deeply ingrained.
Can you give us another concrete example? Maybe contrasting that saving face approach with more direct style.
Sure. Let's use that shop scenario again. You think you've been overcharged. We said that the British English approach might be, "I'm really sorry, I think there may be a problem with the machine because it seems to be slightly more expensive than it should be." Blame shifted to the machine, face saved. Now, compare that to a more direct communication style, maybe common in parts of Germany or some American contexts. In those cultures, directness might be valued more highly seen as a sign of clarity, honesty, maybe efficiency. Someone there might say, perhaps, "Excuse me, I believe there's an error on my bill. This item here is priced incorrectly."
Still polite, but more direct about the error.
Exactly. Still polite, but the focus is directly on the error on the bill, implicitly linked to the process or person, but without all the extra softening layers. The underlying cultural value difference might be efficiency and clarity versus social harmony and avoiding personal discomfort. Neither is inherently better or worse, just different priorities.
Fascinating.
And remember, this applies to nonverbals too. Direct eye contact, as we said, valued in some cultures, avoided in others as confrontation or disrespect. Gestures vary wildly. When in doubt, observe, listen carefully. Adapt your style respectfully. Prioritize respect and open-mindedness above all.
So it's about making sure the other person doesn't feel directly attacked or embarrassed. That seems key for maintaining the relationship and just communicating effectively across different cultures.
Okay, beyond everyday chats, how does this art of polite disagreement translate into more structured places, like academic papers or professional presentations? Is there a strategic advantage there beyond just being polite?
Oh, absolutely. In those environments, academic writing, professional reports, presentations, hedging, and diplomatic disagreement aren't just about politeness. They're critical components of demonstrating nuanced thinking.
Nuanced thinking, how so?
It shows intellectual humility. It signals that the writer or speaker acknowledges complexity, understands that evidence isn't always black and white, absolute, that they're open to different interpretations or counterarguments. This is crucial when you're discussing really complex or debated topics. It's actually a sign of a well-considered critical mind, not necessarily indecisiveness.
So it's about not overstating your claims, especially with research or proposals, being careful with your conclusions. Precisely. For instance, a researcher writing up results would be much more likely to write, "The results suggest that," or "This may indicate that," rather than a very bold, "The results prove that."
Right, because proof is a high bar.
A very high bar, especially in complex fields. That tentative language acknowledges limitations, leaves room for further investigation, acknowledges that scientific understanding evolves. It actually builds credibility. And in professional settings, this diplomatic language is invaluable. It prevents miscommunication, maintains that respectful, collaborative tone. It's especially important in negotiations, in internal emails proposing significant changes, or in presentations to stakeholders. Overly assertive language there can just lead straight to disagreements, defensiveness, maybe even a breakdown in trust or communication.
So it helps keep things constructive, especially when the stakes are high.
Exactly. Using phrases like, "Perhaps we could consider looking into this further," or "It might be beneficial if we explored this alternative," it positions an idea as a suggestion. It invites discussion, buy-in, rather than sounding like a mandate that people might resist.
Collaborative framing.
Yes, and hedging is also a really useful tool for managing discomfort when you have to deliver sensitive or maybe unfavorable news. For example, if a project is running a bit behind schedule, addressing a mistake gently with something like, "It appears there might have been a slight oversight in our initial timeline projection." It lets you address the issue without being unnecessarily harsh or placing blame directly.
Allows everyone to save face again.
Exactly. That gentle approach promotes a constructive dialogue focused on solutions, not blame. It minimizes conflict, ensures that even difficult conversations can remain productive and professional. It's all about maintaining that positive rapport and professionalism, even when you're delivering tough truths.
That's a brilliant way to put it. It really shows how these communication tools aren't just about being nice, they're about being strategically effective. Okay, so after exploring all these strategies for respectful conversation, what happens when you simply cannot find common ground? How do you gracefully end a disagreement without leaving that lingering resentment? Especially when you're talking about really deeply held beliefs or loyalties.
Ah, yes, the impasse. This is where the concept of agreeing to disagree comes in, and it's a very useful, very diplomatic endpoint. It's a way to gracefully exit an argument where you realize, you know what? Neither of us is ever going to convince the other.
Like politics or religion, maybe, or even favorite sports teams.
Exactly. Those kinds of deeply entrenched topics. Politics, fundamental beliefs, fierce loyalties. When you reach that point, continuing to hammer away at it, it usually just leads to frustration, maybe damaged relationships, and honestly, it's just a waste of emotional energy.
So you explicitly acknowledge you won't reach consensus on this particular topic, and then you can move on. Talk about something else without bad feelings, preserving the relationship.
Precisely. It's a mature, pragmatic solution. It signifies a mutual respect. Respect for the other person's right to hold their own opinion, even if it's wildly different from yours. And it shows you're prioritizing the relationship over the need to win that specific argument.
Are there specific phrases for this?
Yeah, common ones include, well, I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one. Or simply, look, we are going to have to agree to disagree. It signals a conscious decision. Let's put the relationship first here.
Okay. Is there a time when you shouldn't agree to disagree?
That's a crucial point, yes. You shouldn't agree to disagree on everything. This strategy is really for matters of opinion, preference, deeply personal belief where there isn't an objective right or wrong. You wouldn't, for example, agree to disagree on a critical safety procedure at work.
No, definitely not.
Or maybe an ethical principle that fundamentally clashes with your core values or legal requirements. In those situations, you need further discussion, maybe more structured conflict resolution, perhaps involving others. But for the vast majority of personal disagreements, it's a powerful tool for maintaining harmony.
And in formal settings, how does this play out?
In more formal settings, if a consensus just isn't reachable at that moment, the idea manifests as maybe tabling a discussion or deciding to revisit it later. You might hear someone say, "I'm afraid we might have to table this discussion for now. Perhaps we need more data before proceeding." Or, "Let's agree to revisit this in our next meeting, perhaps after we've had time to reflect." It's a professional way of saying, okay, we respect each other's differing views. We're not aligned right now, but we can move forward on other items or come back to this when conditions might be better for finding a resolution. It acknowledges the limits while maintaining respect and allowing progress elsewhere.
What a fascinating exploration, navigating one of the absolute trickiest parts of human communication. As we've seen, expressing different opinions politely, constructively, it's such a powerful skill. For clearer conversations, definitely stronger relationships, maybe even better problem solving in the end. It's about consciously combining that verbal tact, those careful word choices, with nonverbal awareness, and also understanding those subtle, often unspoken cultural codes that shape how we interact. It really is a sophisticated dance, isn't it?
It really is. And remember, the goal here isn't about being evasive or avoiding directness entirely just for the sake of it. It's about finding that delicate balance. Honesty and diplomacy. It's about presenting your statements in a way that respects others' viewpoints, genuinely invites open dialogue, and allows you to confidently express your perspective while skillfully managing all the complexities of human interaction. The goal isn't just to be right. It's often more important to be effective and to build bridges, not walls.
Well said. Build bridges, not walls. So for you, our listener, what stands out most from this discussion about expressing a different viewpoint respectfully? How might some of these strategies change your next challenging conversation, whether that's at home, at work, or maybe even online? Thank you for joining us for this really insightful discussion.
Great job today on Just Say It, where every phrase brings you closer to fluency. If you found this lesson helpful, click the bell to never miss an episode and leave a comment sharing your favorite tip. Until next time, keep practicing and just say it.